Welcome. Welcome.
Test.
One more time. Welcome. I'm just going to shout. Oh, I need my little clipboard.
You know what? Dave, the video guy's right in there. Would you go ask him, tell him to make our mics hot?
Do what?
The video guy is right in there. Will you ask him to make our mics hot? We're ready to start. I just asked Dave to go make our mics hot. You ready?
Ready? Now, much better. Welcome, everyone, to 11 co-teaching strategies.
I don't think they can hear you.
It's either.
Test it.
Okay. One more time. Oh, much better. Welcome, everybody, to 11 co-teaching strategies. My presenter is Belinda Karch.
We still don't have their attention.
Okay, guys, you ready? Okay, the rule is if you don't get my attention, I'm going to make you come up here and sing a preschool song. Okay,
we
good.
might have to do that to get their attention.
Can you tell I'm a preschool teacher? Okay.
Can you hear us in the back? Wave at us if you can hear us in the back. Excellent. Thanks for your attention.
Good.
There we go.
Belinda Karch is a professor of doctoral programs at Concordia University, Irvine, and a professor emeritus from California State University, Fullerton. Dr. Karge is an expert in research-based instructional strategies. Her professional record demonstrates a consistent pattern of scholarly and creative activities, including research, publications, 2 textbooks, 5 curriculum tests, 4 book chapters, several educational tools, and over 150 articles and numerous grants. Money, money, money. She travels extensively as a consultant for the U.S. Department of State Office of Overseas Schools. Just put your hand up. I'm happy to collect cards for Dr. Karch to answer at the end of the session. And please use your app to complete surveys and the overall day survey at the end of the day. And thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for being here and hanging on for the end of the day. I really appreciate it. I want to share with you just a little bit about my background and how I came to sharing and presenting and writing on co-teaching. I was actually co-teaching in the early 80s before we really looked at co-teaching. And at that time, we were focusing in on more what the teacher wanted. And for me, it was a great combination. I started my career as a high school biology teacher, moved into special education, and it was a great opportunity for me to bring my special ed students into those bio classrooms. So I co-taught with colleagues at both the high school and later on at the elementary level. Fast forward then, spent some time, I've worked at 5 different universities, both East Coast and West Coast, as well as taught overseas. And in doing that, I've watched co-teaching ebb and flow through the years. And one thing I've learned is that we didn't have real solid research until recently to show us the gains for the students. Meaning that back in the 80s when we did it, it was fun, it was more for the teacher, but now we've really started to see what happens for academic outcomes and growth that students make and the rationale behind that. So I spent most of my career in Cal States, San Diego State, Northridge, Cal State Fullerton, working with teacher educators and training teachers, and I see myself as a teacher. The last 2 years I've worked at Concordia University, Irvine, where I can really dive into some of that research and look at that research. If anyone's interested in a doctoral program, please come and talk to me afterward. We have a very unique model. You show up on a Saturday, you start one class, end another class, and then you go 8 weeks online. There's a trip to Washington, D.C. as a policy class, and there's an opportunity to go overseas. And we're starting a cohort in Monterey very soon. So if you're interested, come chat it up with me. We also want to move forward in thinking about some of our goals together today. And what I'm hoping to do is facilitate some learning, although remember, I only have an hour with you. Quite frankly, typically this presentation is a day-long presentation. And typically I combine it with Engage 11 and we do engagement strategies alongside the co-teaching. Today we don't have time for that. So we're gonna really focus on the 11 co-teaching strategies, but we're gonna have a few little engagement items that I'll talk about and that you will see in some of the videos that I'm showing with you. I also want to interest you in co-teaching. I'd like you to see the benefits of co-teaching and why we do that and share some of that data with you. And then finally, I just want to add some value to the work you do. Here, you gave up today to be here. You're still here this afternoon. Just really appreciate that and want to just dive right in. So hopefully you're ready to do that with me. So first of all, let me tell you that co-teaching falls under the umbrella of collaboration. So when we think collaboration, we think mutual support, we think converging values, joint decision making, and one of the best ways we can do that is to co-teach and to work together. And when you start thinking about collaborative co-teaching, one of my favorite citations, and you'll notice I will not be reading very many slides to you, but this is one that I think is worth it. This citation captures it. It says, co-teaching is defined as two teachers working together in a classroom with groups of students sharing the planning, organization, delivery, and assessment of instruction, as well as the physical space. Both teachers are actively involved and engaged in all aspects of the instruction. And I know from doing many workshops like this, many PD, professional learning opportunities, one of the big questions is related to how do we get that planning time, and I understand that. But my focus today is really to show you the co-teaching and to entice you. And to begin with, I'd like to show you a video that was put together by a school in Southern California. These two teachers did something very unique. They designed their video and they took it to the school board, and I'll tell you why after you watch the video. Were two amazing teachers I had a chance to work with after they had read the literature and started to look at co-teaching. And they didn't realize that when you initially think about co-teaching, what we're looking at is a classroom where approximately a percentage of students with disabilities, before you panic, let me tell you, the research tells us that percentage could be anywhere between 0 and 30%. We'd like to get it at about 20% of that classroom of students with disabilities. And they didn't know that. And when they first started co-teaching, the reason you saw those classrooms of 60 is they took the entire, what they used to call RSP math class, and put it together with a traditional math class, so that's why they had 60 students in there. So they went to the school board and said, hey, you know, we've seen progress. Let us show you the progress that these 60 students have made. But now that we're learning about co-teaching and reading the research, we understand that we really need to narrow this down. So their school board was really positive and supportive of them moving forward and changing numbers in classrooms. So just shows you what teachers can do. So be an advocate for your practice. I want to jump right in, and you're going to see that the areas of co-teaching that I share with you are split up into 11 categories. And that's because I've studied my good friends, Marilyn Friend, Lynn Cook, Wendy Markowski, some of the big names, Chris Walter Thomas, in co-teaching for a really long time. And I've learned quite a bit from the literature. And one of the things I've learned is you want to get really quickly past these three right here. So I clumped them together, and you'll see I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. And as you know, those of you who are already co-teaching, how many of you are already co-teaching that are here? Give me a feel. Virtual, I can't see you. So only about a third of my room here. as people know who are already co-teaching, essentially what begins to happen is if we have the general ed teacher providing the content and the special ed teacher just kind of walking around giving support, that gets old really fast, because the concept behind co-teaching is that you are sharing your credentials. So both of you are credentialed teachers and you're sharing the workload. That's why it's important for you to plan, to provide access, to provide instruction, and to evaluate together as a team. Whether you're somebody who, as a special ed teacher, you're spending time in 3 different classrooms, so you're working with 3 different teachers, or if you have the luxury of co-teaching with just one person, we still want to make sure that you're working together and that you get past this really quickly. Now, you could certainly start out here, and one of the best ways to learn about a classroom is to spend a little time in it. So have one teach. Traditionally, that would be the general ed teacher, and the specialist could come in and assist where possible. But notice that right here, this bullet, one teach, one assist, is not highly recommended in the literature, yet it's the dominant co-teaching strategy. And it's not highly recommended in the literature because of what I just shared with you. The danger in this strategy is the fact that one teacher's doing all the work. But it does work really well in situations, for example, where we have a student teacher or resident teacher, an intern, somebody who's learning. At Polk University in Florida, they have adopted this model, teaching all 7 co-teaching strategies to their students. And this is one of their students, and we're gonna drop in here to a conversation she had with her instructor.
Hi, my name is Nikki. I'm in the EPI course at Polk State, and I am doing my internship
Probably need it a little
Berkeley
louder.
Elementary. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the co-teaching book that we've been using during the internship. One thing I found very helpful is the one teach, one assist. I think this works really well for struggling students. One teacher is the primary one teaching the lesson, and the other one can kind of go around and help those struggling. The students have really benefited from this. They're able to complete their assignments in a more timely manner, and it just gives a little extra help to both teachers, and you can kind of see those other students that you may not have known were struggling as you're walking around collecting data, viewing their work. It just gives a few more eyes on their work and really helps the students in the long run.
So Nikki was an intern, beginning teacher in Florida, and for her, this model worked very well. And I do encourage it for beginning teachers. And for those of you who work in higher ed, we have lots of training through the McLeod co-teaching model that works very well. But I would ask those of you who have been teaching for a while or who are working together to move rather quickly through these first 3. And the second model, a one teach, one observe, is a great one for getting to know the feel of the classroom. So the general ed teacher can teach while the specialist observes the classroom, gets a feel for the student, sees what's going on, gets a feel for the general style of the general ed teacher. And then the specialist can take over the entire class, and it gives that general ed teacher a little window into what's happening in their classroom. And I've had so many general ed teachers say how fun this is just to sit back and watch their own classroom as somebody else teaches and really observe the student who's highly gifted, the student who has autism, the student who has a learning disability, the student who just needs a little extra support with behavior, and to see that going on. So the one teach observe works very well for that in terms of getting a deeper understanding for who our students are. Those models typically quickly progress to a one teach, one support, where somebody is doing the instruction and the other one, as Nikki shared, is kind of walking around and spending a little time supporting and working together so that they can support mostly behaviors. And this might look something like this. My good friend Megan down in Anaheim shared this video with me. And by the way, every video I am showing you, teachers shared with me. I didn't make any of these cuts. And if you have videos of you co-teaching, I'd love to see them, and I promise you I'll use them at least once. So send them my way. This is Megan.
Buddy, are you ready to read along with me? Remember, whenever you see an I blank E, you're going to make the sound I. fingers on your lips. Let me see it. Ah. Very good. That's a big smile. Everyone on the title.
So using explicit instruction, direct instruction.
9 mice.
Megan is
9 mice on tiny tricycles.
the general ed teacher is right there with the support.
Ice. They rode in spite of warning signs. They rode despite mice.
Another example was sent to me by a classroom in Santa Maria. When I'm in California, I try to use California schools because I know how that is. You like to go visit places where they're doing things well. When I travel, I tend to try to pull from those different states. In Santa Maria, this classroom is doing a one-teach support. And essentially what happened is when they brought in the few students with special needs that were going to be added to the classroom from the special day class, they realized the classroom was really, really tight. And so some of the kids weren't able to see, and they wanted to keep the design with the clusters of desks. So what they did for One Teach, One Support is the main teacher, whoever that would be for the day, which they switched around, was up at the board, and the other teacher was to the side, basically just copying what the other teacher was saying. So the kids could hear what's going on, but they can also see, depending on which way they're facing in the classroom. So I've also recently been in classrooms where this is done with technology. I was in Laguna Beach last week, and I got to see it done with technology. So either way, but for them, it worked with the whiteboards. So that concept of just kind of getting to know each other should happen pretty quickly. And within about 3 months, you should be to a point where you're able to just dive in and really analyze this group of teaching methodologies, the graze and tag, the parallel, the station, as well as, oh, I apologize, there's a little typo there, as well as the connections. So I'll show you what those look like. First of all, think of wrestling. I'm from the Midwest. My family, my cousins were all wrestlers. And think of what you watch during a wrestling match where there's like a lot of flipping over back and forth. That's the concept behind graze and tag, is that we have the opportunity to share the teaching role. So this is an example from Anaheim Union High School District. This is a math class.
Turn over to the other side, the blank side of the paper. You are going to copy what I write. 2, subtract, and double underline the word subtract, only the word subtract. To subtract, comma, in all capital letters.
Because of time, I'm going to move it forward a little bit so you can kind of get a feel here.
Go ahead and read that nice and loud. Good job. Let's give Valentine 2 claps on 3. 1, 2, 3.
You might be familiar with that methodology. Randy Strick, Rick Morris talk about a behavior strategy.
Nice job, Angelina. Let's give her 2 knocks on 3. 1, 2, 3.
So the strategy is an opportunity for the students to stay focused when somebody is asked to present something. And so that's what you were seeing going on there.
Let's give her 2 snaps. Warm up your fingers. 2 snaps on 3. 1, 2, 3.
So the students get used to the fun stuff going on around them, and they can really focus then on the learning component that's happening. So a graze and tag, where they're moving back and forth. Parallel teaching is strategy 5. You can see I'm moving very quickly on purpose. Parallel teaching is an opportunity for 2 teachers to be side by side. So in this classroom, you'll notice that they're side by side. I took these pictures. One teacher is off teaching the exact same content as the other teacher is teaching. They just both have smaller groups. I was sent this picture, and somebody sent me a little email, and they said, Belinda, I want you to look at this. I bet you can't decide which one was a special ed teacher and which one was a general ed. And of course, I said, well, I think that probably the larger would be the specialist. And they said, oh no, we want you to know that was the general ed teacher. The special ed teacher had the one down below. And the reason I share that visual with you is because they planned together, they separated out, they taught the exact same lesson. But during that teaching, the specialist had a group of students that were moving very quickly and were picking up very quickly. So she moved a little faster through the curriculum, where the general ed teacher had some students where she really had to spend some time reteaching, didn't go quite as fast, but teaching the exact same curriculum. I've had teachers who use this model who'll come and say, it's the first time that I really feel like I'm getting to the depth of my content. Because when I have those smaller groups, we plan together, and then I have those smaller groups, I can go so much deeper than the superficial of just me in the classroom with 40 kids or whatever. So the concept behind parallel teaching is we do the exact same thing and we just divide the group. So I'm going to show you a sample of that happening.
In this video, we are working on a new Common Core project where the students have to collaborate to create a children's book using Prezi. Students are using a plot chart to outline their story. They are sharing their ideas and have to agree upon key events. Go ahead and move on to this one, Fabian, so that you guys can get your group one. Oh, you ripped your important. Once you say, okay, everybody's doing story title, is it hero? That's your story title? Superhero. Superhero? Okay, so everybody write down the superhero for story title. And keep going with each of the things that you're writing down, okay? So then what's next? Genre. What's your genre? Do you all agree adventure? Okay, write it down. So keep going like that, okay? Let's start with what you have. First person, you guys are going to write one of the characters in the story. No. So third person limited. You want to just follow one character. If you want third person on third person. Lisa is helping individual groups while I am targeting a specific group that is struggling with the communication piece of this lesson. We created this group thinking that there was an academically strong student and a socially strong student that would help make this group be successful. However, our academically strong student became aggressive and the group needed teacher support.
Interesting, huh? So that group there in the middle was set up to really support students who had some more behavior challenges, where the other three groups, so all four groups are doing the same thing, so that's why it's still parallel teaching. The other three groups, one teacher was going around and watching what was happening while the one was right there in the center. Another example of parallel teaching, this comes from the Central Valley.
But I can tell you what they want to find.
In this sixth grade class, half of the students are out at PE, while the resource teacher and gen ed teacher have split the class into two groups. This is parallel teaching, as both teachers are teaching the same lesson with fewer students. Students are working on reading comprehension and getting the gist of the nonfiction article. And then
Moving on to station teaching, oftentimes we think of station teaching as kindergarten classrooms, where there's little stations set up and the kids are all moving around. And yet, station teaching works beautifully at all levels. My secondary friends do this just as well as my kindergarten or preschool friends do. And the concept behind station teaching is that we would set up stations. But here's something to think about. In this scenario I have up on the slide, teacher A works for half the class on a unit of study, and teacher B works with the other half the class. So if you have two things parallel going on that you want to support, works really nicely, because then we can swap. Or we could even have like an independent workstation, or maybe a computer workstation going on, or a library station going on. One of the rock star teachers I work with in the poli-sci program, a high school program, they coach debate, and what they do is they set up in their classrooms debates where one of them teaches everybody in the class the pro side, and the other one teaches everybody in the class the con side, and then they have these amazing debates. And they've shared with me that the content is so much richer, But more importantly, it's fun because both the teachers, like imagine if one's on the pro side and one's on the con side, and they're actually a part of this debate, it's a strengthly competition, meaning it's a friendly competition, and we don't have the teacher just kind of sitting back watching. They're actually participating with their debate groups. And since they started co-teaching, they've written me that they've won several debates and competitions, and they really believe it's because of the training, the way that they're coaching their students. They're able to just really give viable support. Here's another example of station teaching, very differently done than the one I just talked to you about. And this is a Southern California example.
This is where mixed team goes up to the top of the mountain, and they see that something is rocky, and everyone was rooting for that.
They're rooting for him now. Are they trying to catch her anymore?
Day 10.
No.
Day 10. When they get to the top of the mountain, who do they see that's blocking the trail? What was the problem on day 10? The team had gotten tangled, lost, confused, and tangled. Excellent. What did Aki do?
And you're comparing and picking one.
Stop!
But I want them both
Stop
to be
them by circling.
Okay.
And make them go the beautiful. Last part of day 10. Last part of day 10. They hear the noise and they see that Aki is going to. Oh, we forgot. Aki is going to run and she's going to win.
All righty. When we do day-long workshops in working with teachers on co-teaching, at this point we stop and talk about differentiation and the importance of and the beauty of really being able to focus on individual students. I'm going to show this video to you one more time, and I want you to really notice the differentiation that's going on. For example, in the other part of the classroom, not this one here, but in the other part of the classroom, you will see something that looks kind of like this. And if you look closely, what it is it was the teacher's notes. And she had given this to an individual student as an accommodation. But you'll also notice that the peer goes like this and kind of pushes it down and says, you don't need this anymore. And so the student is actually working with a peer who's supporting. You'll notice that the other table, the students are all working with peers, and the teacher is moving around supporting the peer interaction. They've set up the peers on purpose based on my good friend Dr. Anita Archer's strategy, which is we take the highest performer with the middle performer with the emerging, and we never take that lowest emerging student with the highest. Why would that be? Yeah, frustration level, right? Okay, so they've set up there. Another thing you're going to see at this table is the teacher is using total physical response. Now, when they first started co-teaching, the general ed teacher shared with me that what happened was the whole group was doing total physical response. And the general ed teacher went back and said, you know what, I can't handle it. It is so noisy in this classroom. We're gonna have to figure something out. And the specialist thought about it, and she realized that the total physical response was for one particular child in that group. And that particular child just needed to be involved. And she thought, you know what, I bet if I do the total physical response, as long as he's watching me and he's involved that way, it'll probably work for him. And sure enough, it did. So they were able to utilize that. And you can probably see who that student is as we're watching here. The other thing you want to watch is how she tags into, with her eyes, certain students. She's using a form of differentiation, just making sure that every student in her group that she has there is on target and is with her. So watch one more time, and there's other differentiation going on as well, but those are just a few. So watch one more time, this time not as much for the co-teaching, but more for the differentiated curriculum and the accommodations. Oops, sorry about that. Let's go back. There we go.
Day 9. This is where mixed team goes up to the top of the mountain, and they see that.
So these are the teacher notes right there. Notice how they're all in pairs.
Day 10. Day 10. When they get to the top of the mountain, who do they see that's blocking the trail? What was the problem on day 10? The team had gotten tangled, lost, confused, and tangled. Excellent. What did Aki
And
do?
you're comparing, I'm picking one.
Stop!
But I want them both
Stop
to be
them by circling
Okay.
and make them go the beautiful. Last part of day 10. Last part of day 10. They hear the noise and they see that Aki is going to. Oh, we forgot. Aki is going to run and she's going to win.
All right, and yet another example of co-teaching in station teaching. This particular classroom, they do not have the luxury of having computers for everybody or Chromebooks, and so they needed to have a way where they could set up a station because they were teaching Prezi, much like our UDL speaker this morning used, that's a Prezi. They were teaching the students how to do Prezi, so they needed to have a place for that, so they built that right into their co-teaching.
Just right now? And you did it that fast? Oh, okay. Did you make a Prezi? Very good. Then you can go on Aries if you're done. Go ahead and click on.
So what does that mean?
We're gonna go through Mozilla.
Very good. Okay, so let's start at the top. We're gonna do what's called closed reading. So when
Then you're going to type in Prezi.
to say the next word. So let's practice it.
Search, yeah.
Raphael at the top. Put your finger on and.
Prezi. She's doing something.
And I moved here from Guatemala. I could speak. Everybody would say English right now if I stopped. Okay. I learned it on the playground and watching lots of TV. Don't believe what people say. Cartoons make you smart. My father, he worked all day in a kitchen with Mexicans and Salvadorians. His English was worse than a kindergartner's. He would only buy food at the bodega down the block. What's the bodega?
Mexican place.
Like supermarket.
Okay, good, yeah. What are you
And strategy 7 in that cohort of 4 co-teaching strategies is alternative teaching. And one of my favorite examples, and I've asked him to videotape, we haven't had a chance to do that yet, but a wonderful 6th grade teacher in Buena Park, what he does is every Thursday, he and his co-teacher give an assessment in their math class. And what they do is they give 3 problems. And they say to the students, and they know this, and they do it every single Thursday, they say, if you get them all right, you get to go to enrichment. If you get 2 correct, you get to make the decision. Either you go to enrichment or you can stay back for a reteach. If you miss 2 or if you miss 3, you must go to reteach. And so they do this on a regular basis, and they're able to alternatively set up their stations. So one of them is doing enrichment, and the other one is focusing in on a reteach or an alternative way, an alternative method of just sharing with the students what they've already heard so they can see something again. And they have students that will self-select to hang out and really listen to it again because they want to learn the information. At the beginning, admittedly, they had a couple of students who'd fudge so they could go to enrichment, but then they realized that they were lost the next week. And so they ended up in enrichment in alternative teaching the next week, and they realized that the reteach was really important. So they were able to bring their entire 6th grade class on board with this and held the students accountable for really looking at those 3 exam questions and seeing how they did in spreading out. Just a great way to use alternative teaching. So what we often see in alternative settings is we see maybe a larger group or a smaller group. Sometimes the smaller group is the reteach, but sometimes that's the larger group. It just depends on the topic and what's going on in that classroom. This is an example of alternative teaching in a language arts 8th grade class.
Very good. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have most of you guys working on SSR. So you're going to be having your books out and be reading. And we're going to have a small group of people who are reviewing plot over here with Mrs. Buscari. So you guys have your books out and go ahead and start reading. Unless your name is called, you're going to take all of your things with you and join Miss Buscari in the group over here. So Michelle, Ashley, Giselle, Samantha, Carlos, and Kevin, you guys grab your things and go over here to review. The rest of you read. You're reading.
These students were chosen for an alternative group lesson because they did not meet the learning objective on the plot test the day before, which is a score of 70% or better. I am using whiteboards and visuals along with memory clues that are embedded in the reteaching. After the lesson, students were asked to study and retake the test the following day. Our students are very successful when we practice this type of co-teaching strategy.
So that cluster, I recommend that teachers spend a good deal of time, maybe 6 months. So if you're starting out and you're thinking about co-teaching, you would spend maybe 3 months getting to know each other with the first set, and then the next 6 months you would really spend here in this area, just kind of experimenting and seeing what works for you. I'm hoping we have enough of these. We brought a copy for those of you who are here in person, a little door prize that has each one of the strategies, but it does align with the Engage Co-Teach book. Each of the strategies that is explicitly explained in the Engage Co-Teach book, which is over in the vendor center. But this area right here, the team co-teaching, that's where you want to spend basically that first year. Once you've gotten to a point where you're on a roll and you're ready to do some other creative things, that second year, or maybe you moved a little quicker with your colleague and you've done some co-teaching other places and you're ready to move on, that's when I encourage you to really focus on these last strategies. And this is where my work does differentiate from some of the other books that you see on co-teaching, because most of the others stop with the last 7 that the last area that we just shared. So this is going to move us a little bit deeper. And I do recommend that you have some experience with the other models before you move to this area. And because we're just introducing today, and this is set up for beginners, I'm only going to show you one video from this area. But this is a video related to conversation teaching. And conversation teaching was actually developed by 2 teachers in Anaheim Union High School District, and now Marilyn Friend and others have been writing about it and using their work in their videos. And what they noticed is they co-taught 3 math classes together. And they noticed that when they were on break and the 2 teachers were talking, the kids were like eavesdropping on their conversation, and they were always listening. And they started to think about, like, talk shows and, what students are used to watching and the media, and they thought, wow, we could do that too. And this is why it takes a little time, because what happens is if you're going to use conversation teaching, you've got to do some planning. Because as you're going to see in this video sample, they had to really know the content, both of them. The woman in the video, Tracy, is the ed specialist, and she is asking questions that she knows her students need to have the answers to, or the lower achievers in the room need to have the answers to, those emerging learners. And notice he's teaching the content as if he would teach it, but he's kind of adjusting a little bit. And the students are just glued to them, like they're watching this going on. What they've learned, and if you try this, you should know, they've learned that it works much better if just the 2 teachers have a dialogue. And if you try to spread out, meaning like you'll see that there's one on one side of the room, the other on the other side of the room, and they're kind of like talking at each other, ignoring all the students, just having this conversation. And they found that that works better. And to not include the students, like not get involved with, the quote, they call it hackling. Like when we present together, Jeff will go, I don't let the students hackle. They want the students to really watch what's happening. And there's other times when they'll allow student interaction. But during their actual planned conversation, this becomes something very important. So, and I'm looking at this. Oh, no. That's not the right video.
Okay, so what do we figure out?
All right, I apologize. That video did not load. When you're doing an activity, I'll try to reload the other video. Sorry about that. Okay, so just imagine 2 people on different sides of the classroom just really chatting it up and sharing and talking and collaborating, and that's really what you would see. And like I said, I'll try to grab that video. The role play strategy for strategy 9 is similar, and it's where the teachers would know each other well enough to where they could actually come in and do a role play together, a full-out role play, like dress in the characters. My friends in history and biology love this because they, can have some fun dressing up as a historical creature, or my friends in biology dress up like the living creature that they are and tell the story, and it's just a lot of fun. So keep that in mind in terms of thinking about strategy 9, which is the role play. Strategy 10 is interactive. And the difference between strategy 10 and strategy 11, shared teaching, is that typically what we see in an interactive classroom is that they spend at least one period or one chunk of time together. So about 60 minutes, 90 minutes together in their teaching. But when we get to true shared teaching, this is where we're sharing the whole responsibility of classrooms. So we do have schools in California as well as across the United States and internationally where teachers are co-teaching a good deal of the day. It happens most commonly in secondary large schools where, let's say, there's 4 or 5 sections of a particular class, and so we can spread out our students with special needs in those sections, and then the teacher can stay with the teacher the entire day. So it's a little different model. It also happens in elementary classrooms where we've made decisions. For example, I worked with a group in Newport where the entire kindergarten special day class came into a kindergarten classroom. There were only 7 students in that class, so they spent their whole day with a general ed kindergarten teacher, and they co-taught all day long together. So there's situations like that is what we call shared teaching. So it's like, that's the quick version, and I knew I only had really an hour with you, so I wanted to just really quickly zip over some of those ideas. I mentioned earlier that there's also a book that goes along when I do day-longs that we put together, Engage 11, and it has engagement strategies that are very research-based. And I would like to use one of those engagement strategies right now, and I hope those of you that are watching virtually will do the activity alongside with us. And essentially, this activity is a tell, help, check activity. It's a cooperative learning strategy from the 80s. There's good, solid evidence that this strategy is very effective in classrooms. And essentially what's going to happen is in a minute, I'm going to ask you whether you're virtual or whether you're here in this room. I'm going to ask you to stand up and to find a partner. If you're able to remain standing during this activity, I would like you to stay standing. If you're physically not able, that's okay. You're welcome to sit down. But you're going to find a partner, and you're going to decide who's a 1 and who's a 2. Once you've done that, if you'll look this way, and there's a lot of you in the room, and so when I need your attention, if you're not looking this way, I'm going to use a signal that looks like this. High five. So see the difference? I'm talking now and high five. So I would expect you to do the same. Okay, so that's the signal we'll use. So I'd like you to find somebody who you're not sitting with. So you're going to talk to somebody you haven't talked to. Be brave, stand up, find a partner. It's okay if we have 3s. If we do have groups of 3s, I need to have 2 2s, and 1 number 1 and 2 2s.
You get 4:15. You keep saying you only have an hour.
But I want to stop for questions.
I got you.
Yeah, because it's so important. All righty, high five. High five. Virtual coordinators, hopefully you're helping too. All right, if you're a 1, would you wave at me? Wave at your virtual coordinator. If you're a 2, would you wave at me? Some groups might have 2 2s if we have groups of 3. Okay, if you're a 1, snap. If you're a 2, snap. That's on purpose. Teacher behavior, we want to make sure that we see that everybody in our room knows if they're a 1 or they're 2 or if they're an elephant and a kangaroo or whatever it is that you are. So what's going to happen here is 1s, I'm going to ask you to talk to the 2s about something. And you can draw from prior knowledge, or you can use what I've shared with you very quickly today. You can think about the videos that I shared. You can jump right into one area of co-teaching. You don't have to like start at the top and go straight down, okay? But what's going to happen is I'm going to give you some time and you're going to talk to your colleague about this area. 2s, you're going to be a listener and you get to make the decision. You can listen all the way through and then add at the end, or as they start talking, you can jump into the conversation at any point. So your decision is going to be your own. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I'm also not going to be giving you time to swap. So in other words, number 1's going to start the conversation, 2's going to either listen all the way through and then talk, or they're going to jump in at some point, okay? And so then a conversation will ensue about this topic. And what you're going to be talking about, of course, is I would love to have my 1s tell my 2s what each of the co-teaching strategies or the suggested formats are. And that's why I say you don't have to go in order and you don't have to remember all of them. But I would like you to hone in and think about what co-teaching strategies might work for you in your particular situation. So go ahead and have a conversation, and Dave, the CEO of Discovery Source, is going to pass out a couple of these. Hopefully we have enough for everybody. If not, you can share so that you have a little cheat sheet, all right? Go ahead and have a conversation. He's coming from the back, so. Need help?
They have their purposes. Oh, good. Yeah. I guess just want to have your teachers for 15 minutes of your. Oh, thank you. Looks like you didn't have. Thank you. Did he think Russ Longman for that one?
So I want to get the book.
Thank you.
We have idea. We forgot some.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mess it up. I'll tell them if they want to see it, they can email me and I'll send it to them.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, because what if, you know? It's like crazy. I just added it at the last minute last night, and it's like, I added the wrong video.
That always happens.
All righty, high five. High five. High five. You'll thank your partner and go ahead and have a seat. All righty, before I move back to the co-teaching strategies, let's just really quickly debrief the Tell, Help, Check strategy. So the concept was a 1 began talking and telling, the 2 then was either helping or adding or sharing, and then the checkpoint was when you had the opportunity to take a peek on the sheet. And I apologize to virtual folks that you may not have had that unless you had the handout in front of you. So the opportunity then to just take a peek at those co-teaching strategies and how it would work for you individually. How did it feel to stand up? Yeah, you've been sitting for a long time. Something you should know, in the cooperative learning research from the 80s, the initial cooperative learning strategies that were partner strategies, such as this one, were actually designed so that we do stand up. We give our students that stretch break. We have that opportunity to let them wiggle around a little bit. But more importantly, the data shows that when students are standing, that eye contact with their partner is much easier attained. Think about it. If I'm like bunched down in a chair or looking at my phone or hanging out, that's a little bit tougher. But if I have just a quick amount of time, and for those of you in preschool, we say no longer than 3 minutes. Those of you in elementary, we say no longer than 6, and those in high school, we say no longer than 9. Although my own experience with high school is I usually only keep them about 5 to 7 minutes. So the concept then is that the students have a chance to just really stand, stretch, and talk, and just gives them that rejuvenation and opportunity. As you saw, you need to have some kind of a signal so that you can pull your group back. That's very important. The beauty of co-teaching is you have those opportunities to share and collaborate. I was in a classroom overseas, and I saw this particular poster, and I asked the teacher about it. They were a co-teaching team, and they had worked together. And the general ed teacher said, I just moved forward with pairs after looking at Tell, Help, Check and Think, Write, Pair, Share and some of the other strategies that were in Engage 11. And she said, I didn't realize that the students with special needs had not had the opportunity to work in partners, and I needed to back up and teach them how to be a partner. So you'll notice on the slide, turn and lean in, look at your partner, listen actively, be able to repeat what you heard, set expectations. You might have to do that with your students. But here's the beauty of co-teaching is you have the opportunity to have 2 of you there supporting the engagement strategies and working together. People often ask me, especially administrators, when we're planning a co-taught day, they'll say, why do you want to include Engage 11? And I say, because most co-teachers say to me, when one person's doing all the teaching, you just fall into that support mode. It's really tough. But we need a way to have students interact. And so this is a wonderful way when you're at those beginning strategies to have some interaction going on. So there's lots of other great strategies in Engage 11, very similar to this one. The other thing to think about in terms of how this works is students need time to process. So take information in, do something with it, kick it back out. So by just virtually getting up and asking you to think about what you just saw and to process with someone else without there being an exam or any kind of an assessment going on, that can help really quickly. But notice there really was an assessment happening. What was I doing? Yeah, I was walking around. I was eavesdropping on your conversations. I was listening to what was happening. That's called formative assessment. So I very quickly could pick up if you've had some experience with co-teaching. Some of you were talking about how you'd like to set this up with your schools. Others were telling experiences that you personally had had or you'd heard others talk about. Some were asking each other questions. So I could really quickly pick up my classroom. And the nice part about that is when you're working together, 2 of you can very quickly pick up that piece and have that opportunity. So keep that in mind, that that formative assessment is a huge piece to where we can really pick up on when we use any of the Engage 11 strategies. So very important for us as educators to just have that opportunity, quick formative assessment. We know what's happening in the room and we can move on. So there's some real critical considerations, and typically when we have a longer time, I allow questions to come as we flow, and people typically ask about these particular areas. And then you have cards on the table and you can ask other questions as well if I don't answer the question that you're thinking of. And the first critical consideration is, how do we initially make an introduction so people get it that there's two teachers in the classroom? And what I've seen work the most effectively is when teachers actually label their classroom. So actually setting up not only the welcome, the door, this is the door here, and these two, but the actual board. Just showing that we work together, we spend time together, the classroom is shared among us. Another thing that people ask me a lot about is planning time. And administrators particularly say, you know, I know that they're going to ask for extra funding for planning. And my standard response is, you might have to do that at first. Because teachers need time, that first year especially, for planning time. The time to plan gets shorter as we get to know each other and we're more comfortable with the curriculum. But initially, yes, we need time. And what we know from the literature is that the most effective way is to have some kind of a weekly co-planning time where we have an established timeline, like maybe 20 minutes. And that might be while the PE instructor has taken the two classes out to PE, and so, the class out to PE, and so now we have the opportunity to sit down together. Assigning preparation tasks. So we come to the table ready to talk, meaning we don't initiate the conversation there at the table. We actually finish our planning meeting with, next time I'm going to have this ready, and then I walk in the room for planning the next week and I have that information ready. So preparation time. The co-planning skills do improve over time, and you need less time. And then document your planning for future. If you're really interested in this, feel free to email me. I have several wonderful articles, one written by my good friend Wendy Markowski, one by Marilyn Friend, that tell you ways to grab time. And some of those are included in this list. Sometimes people use professional learning circles, their professional development time, professional development coordination time. Other times people have a roving sub, where maybe you would hire 2 subs for the day, and then that sub would spend, you know, an hour in this classroom, 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 so those teachers can have that opportunity. Before school and after school is common. Some of the teachers who you saw in the video that I've gotten to know through the sharing of videos have shared with me the way that they plan. The 8th grade team, they told me that they're both young moms and they have children. They like to leave right when school is over, and they're not real good at getting there in the morning because they're dropping kids off. So what they do is every Thursday night at 9 p.m. they give up their own time for, you know, however much is needed. They put their kids to bed, and they give themselves time, and they talk on the phone. That works for them. I have another wonderful team that I work with at Catella High School down in Southern California. They're both coaches. They do not coach the same sport, but they're both coaches, and they have to be here really early in the morning. So what they do is they meet a half hour earlier once a week for coffee. They meet at a Starbucks that's really close to the campus, and they choose to do that. They feel like it brightens their week. They talk about, you know, different things, and they settle in and they plan for a half an hour. That works for them. Admittedly, in both those cases, teachers are giving up their own time, and I understand that. That's hard to do, and that's why if you're an administrator in the room, I encourage you to really think about ways that you can give teachers time during their planning day instead of requesting them to do it outside. A traveling journal, either online or a physical journal, is another wonderful way, especially if you're the ed specialist who works with 3 different teachers. Having an online, maybe a Google Doc format where you can communicate with each other, that works very well. I've seen teachers communicate online very diligently, and that way it minimizes their face-to-face planning time. And of course, impromptu planning sessions. You know, if you've heard Marilyn Friend, you always hear her talking about the bathroom conversations. You know, people walk into the restroom and chat it up. You know, that happens, but I don't recommend it. I recommend that you consider having time together where you can initiate and actually plan, and that you use that weekly planning time very wisely. These are a couple of questions if you're just starting out, things to think about, like, you know, what are content goals? Who are the learners? How can we teach most effectively? How can we break up some of the loads so that we'll both benefit? Talking about behavior discipline systems, so you make sure things jive. Again, if you're really interested in this area, if you email me, I'd gladly share with you other resources I have on how planning works for co-teaching, because it is something that we know that has been really efficient. I want to spend a little bit of time before I open it up with questions on some data. Because remember, I told you at the very beginning, when we first started co-teaching back in the 80s, we did it because teachers were having fun working together. Then there was kind of a low, and people realized that, you know, we hadn't been collecting outcome data, and people did other things. Well, now we've come back, and we're really looking at data. And I'm going to share with you some of the data that I have found in journal articles and data that others have sent me. Because what we know is when co-teaching is done very well, and it's done over a period of time, meaning at least a year together, we see these kinds of amazing growth scores in students. So we actually see opportunities where growth is happening in ways that maybe wouldn't happen in other places. This is a really interesting journal article. This gentleman is a principal at a school, and he noticed that in classrooms where he had 2 teachers, grades were better. It's a charter school on the East Coast, so they don't believe in D's. That's why there's no D's up there. But he noticed that when 2 teachers were together consistently, no matter which classroom he looked at, grades were so much stronger. And so he actually went through and did an analysis over 3 years of teachers who worked together, and then that general ed teacher who was by themselves for that content area, and what kinds of grades were appearing. And he was able to take this data to his school board and say, hey, look, this is the rationale for paying for the extra teachers. We're seeing grades, we're seeing student outcome, we're seeing improvement happen in classrooms where students are having the benefit of 2 teachers. I mean, how cool is that you have a general ed and a special ed teacher working together? And in my experience, if you have a strong team, you have a very strong content expert, and you have a very strong specialist. And that specialist accommodates and modifies and shows the general ed teacher some ideas for adapting, and the general ed teacher picks up on that, and before you know it, they're using those skills other places in their teaching. The general ed teacher is such a strong content expert that they teach the specialists, they teach us a little bit of the tricks related to the trade of their content, whether it's an elementary teaching 6 content areas or a specialist teaching, say, just 1 or 2 periods at the secondary level. This is a really interesting study as well. In this journal article, we have an 11th grade history teacher. He is talking about what happened in classrooms throughout his district related to co-teaching, building on the study that I just showed you. And what I find really fascinating about this particular study, and which I actually reached out to him and had a conversation about, is that notice the blue is the pre-test, the red is the post-test. Notice in the co-taught situation, the pre-test scores are higher to start with. And I said, you know, why do you think that is? What do you think's going on there? And he said, oh, I can tell you. He said, unequivocally, you walk into those classrooms where there's 2 teachers and they're just starting a unit, regardless of whether I'm in a kindergarten classroom or I'm in a, AP bio class at the high school level. He said, when you have two people that are helping monitor the bodies in the room, they're walking around giving support for the pretest, the students are going to key in. How cool is that? Just to have that opportunity. So now we start at a level where we really do have a baseline for our students and we can grow. So what we're seeing time and time again in these classrooms is huge growth rates. If you've been following the data on inclusive ed, you have seen some of this type of data going through different journal articles and different research areas. You've probably also seen things like this related to inclusive practices. That's not my word, that's the author's word, the old model, the collaborative model, but you see the huge benefit. A slide I didn't put in here, but I'd gladly share it with you if you're interested, is an inclusive education slide. It was a study done on the East Coast where they took a kindergarten classroom and they involved the parents from the very beginning, and this group of kindergartners was fully included from the time they were in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. This group of students were put in a segregated classroom from the very beginning all the way to 12th grade. Parents were told at any time you can switch. Just interestingly enough, none of them did. Something that happened is that in the fully included classroom, all but 2 students went to college, and the 2 students that didn't go to college were very productive in the workforce. Of the students that were in the segregated classroom, only 2 students went to college, and the rest of them are all with parents at this point currently. So interesting longitudinal study related to what's happening. Well, if you dig into the research and you really look, like I know a lot of you have done because you're here at Inclusive Classroom, Inclusive Collaborative, you'll know that what the research tells us is what happened in that study is very common. And that is that they had the best of the best in the ed specialists. They had the best special ed teachers. But you know what they were doing? They were focusing on the IEP goals. So while that classroom of kindergartners was focusing on IEP goals, the general ed classroom got both IEP goals and really good, solid curriculum. So what began to happen is this. So it was not intentional. They were very strong ed specialists. But what happened was the group that had the Common Core, that had the core curriculum and the adaptations and the accommodations all in the general ed classroom, their scores rose. This group stayed at a plateau. Many of those students stayed at a second grade level plateau. So we have time and time again where we have articles that really show us that kind of literature. So it's something to really think about in terms of whether you agree or disagree with inclusive services. I hope that you're looking at the literature and you're really seeing it makes a difference for students. And if it can make a difference for that many kids, maybe we should give it a try. So we had a little fun here. These were just some first graders.
What you would like to, why do you like to have 2 teachers teaching you the same lesson, co-teaching together?
Because they're cooperating together.
They're cooperating together. Well, that's a great answer. Well, what do you have to say?
Because they're really fun.
They're really fun. Having 2 teachers together makes it really fun. Why do you like to have teachers co-teach?
Because if the other one has to do something, the other one would teach you the same lesson.
Okay, so they can go back and forth. One can teach and then the other can take turns teaching. Okay.
Because it is very, very fun.
It's fun to have 2 teachers teaching you at the same lesson.
Because it's really fun.
It's really fun.
We can learn a lot.
You what?
We can learn a lot and it's very fun.
You can learn a lot? Well, how can you learn a lot? Why?
Because there's 2 teachers teaching.
Because 2 teachers are teaching, so you can learn twice as much? Okay.
Just a lot of fun. And I also have video of older kids as well, but I love this one with the first graders. So what I've tried to do is, in a nutshell, give you a quick overview of the Engage Co-Teach. And the way that this booklet is set up is there is research on the top part telling you where the information came from. You'll see Marilyn Friend, Wendy Markowski, some of the top names in the field. And then here you have the actual strategy. So this is designed as a tool to where you can actually kind of hold this and use it like a cheat sheet till you become comfortable with the individual strategy. And the Engage 11 is designed the same way. And those of you who work in early childhood, there's also Engage Early Learner, focusing on language ideas for those little guys. So what we've done, like I said, for Engage Co-Teach, is we've set out supportive co-teaching, team co-teaching, and advanced co-teaching. And I decided, instead of going and grabbing that video, since I last night dropped in the wrong one, if you're interested, just email me. I'll gladly send you a Google so you can see a snapshot of that conversation teaching. I think it's really important that we celebrate where we've come since the 80s in our research, as well as what we know about co-teaching. And I hope that you'll really take the time to really focus in on co-teaching. So I purposely ended about 15 minutes early because I know when you do a presentation like this, people always have questions. In my PowerPoint, I've given you some references, but I also have my email up there, and I'd be glad to communicate with you and share with you information. So if you'll take a minute and jot some questions down, we can definitely begin answering those. Do we have any questions virtually that I should start with? All right, maybe it's just that it's the end of the day. Typically, we have tons of questions in co-teaching presentations like this. When we do day-long workshops, we stop in between each one and we analyze how that would work, in our own classroom. So I know you haven't had a chance to breathe and really think through that yet. Mm-hmm. Maybe they just all want to go home, right? Yeah. A question that is very commonly asked is, what happens if people are put together and they don't volunteer? Well, I think you know the answer to that. That's why people ask the question. But if there's administrators in the room, let me tell you, all of the research talks about parity and equality, and the idea that you want to make sure that you have volunteers when you move forward with trying out co-teaching. The worst thing we can do is say to a veteran teacher, I'm sorry, but you're going to co-teach next year. We need to give them time to study the methodology and to volunteer and say, yeah, I'm willing to do that. Because it's in those areas where we just assign that we tend to see the challenges. My experience is when people volunteer and they want to do this, they're very, very, very successful. When people don't volunteer, it takes longer for them to move forward. Another question a lot of people ask is, how long do you recommend teams stay together? And I've met teams that have worked together for 10 years or more, but let me tell you what the research says. The research says 3 years. And the reason is that we spend the time, we work really well. As ed specialists, we contribute with our general ed colleagues. We work with that person for about 3 years, and then we move on. It gives that teacher a break, but it also does something else that a lot of people don't think about. It allows them to utilize all those strategies and the learnings they've had from their collaborator, and it gives someone else in that grade level or that subject area the opportunity or the chance to be involved. So the research does tell us don't keep teachers together too long, which again, I know teachers love, that you find somebody you really like to work with and you want to stay for a long time, but share the wealth. Yeah. Any other questions? All righty, well, I will definitely hang around if you have individual questions, and Dave is right here. I think you're going to go back over to the vendor table, right? So he has the Engage 11 available. It's just $20, totally worth your time and money. So thank you. I appreciate you being here today and staying. Nice job.